Welcome to the Riverine village, a place where history hid its secrets for centuries. Imagine mist hovering over the river scouts watching from the forest, and every decision could mean life or death. If you could witness a day in this village in 1225 CE, what would you notice first? The river, the people, or the danger lurking in the shadows? C. 1225 CE. Along the winding riverbanks of what is now the northeastern region of North America, the Riverine village awakens under a heavy morning mist. Sunlight pierces the dense canopy in thin, scattered beams glinting off the water's surface. The air is thick with the scent of damp. Villagers stir carefully. Women adjust bundles of firewood on their backs. Children dart between huts carrying small baskets of food, and hunters check their bows and arrows before slipping silently toward the forest edge. Canoes rock gently in the current, laden with tools, harvested grain, and woven baskets ready for transport or rapid movement if needed. Every motion is deliberate, every sound measured. The village has learned that, yet the calm is deceptive. Across the river, a faint column of smoke rises unfamiliar. In this moment, every decision matters. The actions of a single scout, the placement of a signal, even the path chosen by a mother guiding her children, the horizon hints at conflict, yet it is not fully visible. Every sound, a snapping branch, a ripple along the bank, a bird startled into flight, becomes a signal, a warning, a part of a complex communication network honed over generations. And in the quiet, a question hangs in the air. What will happen if those boats reach the shore? Who will make the first move? And what will be lost if the decision comes too late? History itself seems poised to pivot in these moments. The Riverine village could either endure adapting its paths, preserving its knowledge and traditions, or be forced to abandon lands held for generations. One choice, one signal, one movement along the river could reshape the balance of power, redraw the map of territory, and leave an indelible mark that history will later call by name. So, we ask, where are we exactly? When is this unfolding, and what is happening right before our eyes that will ripple through generations to come? As the mist lifts slowly, the village prepares. Canoes are loaded, arrows are fletched, scouts take their positions. Every villager feels the weight of this morning, knowing that the events of the next few hours will echo through centuries. The river reflects the dim light like a mirror of time itself, and the story of Riverine Village begins here at the edge of water forest and survival. By 1225 CE, Riverine Village existed not in isolation, but as part of a complex web of rivers, tributaries, and floodplains. For generations, the community had relied on seasonal rhythms of water and forest planting and harvesting in synchrony with flood cycles, following migrations of fish, and trading with neighboring confederations were consolidating power. Ambitious chieftains sought to control key river corridors, claiming rights over fishing grounds and trade routes that Riverine Village had relied upon for generations. Where once informal agreements governed access to resources, now explicit expectations of tribute, alliance, or submission were enforced. Scouts reported new outposts along the river and observed unfamiliar patrols signal trade. Once a lifeline had become a source of tension. The river served as a conduit for dried fish furs and woven goods connecting distant communities. Larger armed trading parties now dominated main channels, redirecting flows and imposing their control over resources. Riverine Village, with its small canoes and limited social pressures, amplified vulnerability. Epidemics had reduced populations in neighboring settlements, forcing families to seek new land. Environmental variability added another layer of complexity. Rising waters could isolate sections of the village, while storms or shifting river channels threatened homes and cultivated fields. Forested paths provided concealment, but the convergence of political ambition, economic competition, and environmental unpredictability created an unavoidable tension. Scouts observed footprints and signs of outsiders along tributaries previously considered safe. Trading partners failed to appear on schedule, hinting at blockades or rerouting. Minor disputes over fishing rights could escalate into lethal confrontations. The village could no longer. The broken map extended beyond geography. It was a reflection of fractured authority, contested trade routes, environmental hazards, and social vulnerability. Riverine Village was squeezed between emerging centers of power, forced to navigate contested waters while preserving autonomy. Knowledge became the primary currency of survival. Elders, scouts, and hunters interpreted terrain movement and social signals. Each riverbend, marsh, and forested hill held strategic significance. Tributaries could serve as escape routes or traps. Shallow channels might strand intruders or conceal defensive canoes. Observation posts along elevated points allowed scouts to monitor approaching boats while remaining unseen. The villagers' ability to leverage these environmental features transformed potential vulnerability into tactical advantage. As the mist rose each morning, the villagers understood that the river was no longer just a source of sustenance. It was a stage upon which political, economic, and environmental forces converged. Their actions, decisions about which channels to monitor, where to position families and supplies, when to signal, and how to interpret the movements of outsiders would determine the village's fate. Failure to anticipate the actions of neighbors or misreading environmental cues could result in the loss of lives. The immediate consequences of this fractured landscape were tangible. Supply lines became precarious, fishing grounds were contested, and the village had to prepare for rapid evacuation at any moment. Every choice, a canoe repositioned, a child guided to a hidden path, a signal relayed through reeds and hollow logs, could prevent catastrophe. The community's survival depended on the integration of generational knowledge, environmental observation, and social cohesion. The villagers were aware that they were part of a larger network of forces. Political consolidation, upstream, economic domination of trade routes, and environmental fluctuations all intersected at the riverbanks. To outsiders, the landscape might appear calm and navigable. To Riverine village, every ripple, every shadow, and every change in current. Understanding this context is essential for appreciating the villagers' later actions. Each scout, elder, and family member relied on accumulated knowledge to make real-time decisions. The stakes were immediate, yet their effects would ripple across generations. Observing currents, interpreting footprints, monitoring bird flight, and anticipating human movement became By mid-morning of the critical day, scouts confirmed the approach of unfamiliar boats. The village had anticipated this moment, but now faced the real convergence of political, economic, and environmental pressures. Families prepared, canoes were moved, signals were ready. Every villager understood that the river could either protect them or betray them, depending on the choices made in the next hours. In this environment, the villagers' decisions were not random. They were informed by decades of adaptation. Every element of terrain, every flow of water, and every interaction with outsiders carried significance. The broken map had revealed vulnerabilities, opportunities, and the absolute necessity of coordination. As the day unfolded, the villagers moved with quiet precision. Canoes were positioned to control access, families guided to hidden paths. Scouts monitored every tributary. Smoke signals and drum taps relayed information, creating a living network of observation and response. The actions taken on this day, by evening, the village had reinforced its strategic positions, protected families, and prepared for the next wave of challenges. The broken map was no longer a theoretical concept. It was enacted in real time as knowledge, terrain, and human agency intersected to preserve the community. The events of this day exemplify how Riverine village adapted. By the time the river revealed the approach of unfamiliar boats, all eyes in Riverine village turned toward Ahiok, the young scout, whose keen observation and intimate knowledge of the tributaries had become indispensable to the village's survival. Barely in his mid-teens, Ahiok had spent the last decade learning the rhythms of the river, the patterns of fish and birds. Ahiok had grown up with a dual sense of responsibility, one to his immediate family and one to the collective well-being of the village. From an early age, he accompanied his father on excursions along the river, learning to distinguish footprints of animals from those of humans, to detect the slight change in current that suggested a newly submerged sandbar, to notice subtle breaks in the forest. His first recognized act as a scout came when he was 7, tracking a deer to its hidden feeding grounds, then signaling his father and other hunters without disturbing the animal. By adolescence, he had successfully intercepted messages about rival parties' movements, guiding families safely past contested fishing areas. Ahiok's reputation was not built on aggression or heroics, but on precision observation. The morning of the approaching intruders, Ahiok's responsibilities multiplied. Canoes were positioned along narrow channels, smoke signals prepared for relaying alerts, and observation points reinforced along marshy banks. Families moved quietly to safer areas. Children guided under the supervision of elders, and supplies were discreetly shifted to prevent loss. His motivations were clear: to protect his family, to maintain the village's autonomy, and to preserve the accumulated knowledge of generations. Fear existed as it should, but it was disciplined, transformed into vigilance and rapid decision-making. He represented both the continuity of cultural knowledge and the adaptive intelligence of the community. The first test came as a canoe entered a shallow reed-choked tributary. Ahiok had anticipated this move, positioning scouts to observe without being detected. Signals were exchanged, a small flick of smoke from a hidden vantage point, a series of knocks on hollow logs, subtle movements in reeds. Ahiok's knowledge of the river's nuances proved decisive. He knew which currents would slow the intruders, which sandbars could strand boats, and which bends offered both concealment for his scouts and vantage points for monitoring enemy movements. The intruder's unfamiliar, but his role extended beyond tactical command. Ahiok also guided younger scouts, transmitting crucial skills and knowledge under pressure. He instructed them on reading the water, noting subtle disturbances that could indicate movement, and interpreting animal behavior as early warning signals. These teachings were not abstract. They were matters of survival carried. His interactions with the villagers reflected trust and mutual dependence. Elders relied on him to extend their perception beyond the immediate village, while peers respected his insights and sought guidance. Ahiok in turn acted as mentor and protector to younger children, teaching them how to navigate both the physical landscape. Throughout the morning, every decision Ahiok made carried weight. Should a canoe be shifted to block a channel or to create a diversion? When should families be moved along concealed forest paths? Ahiok's understanding of environmental cues was paired with his interpretation of human behavior. He recognized that the intruders relied on assumptions that villagers would retreat or act predictably. By exploiting these assumptions, he manipulated the flow of engagement, creating delays, confusion, and opportunities. Every ripple in the water, every rustle, his fears were measured and disciplined. By midday, the first minor confrontations had been navigated successfully. The intruders' progress was slowed, and Riverine village. Ahiok also represented the village's cultural continuity. He participated in seasonal ceremonies and ritual practice. Even as the first wave of threats subsided, through Ahiok, viewers witnessed the interplay of individual skill, communal responsibility, and environment. The guiding questions emerge naturally. What drives Ahiok's decisions? How do fear, responsibility, and cultural knowledge interact in moments of crisis? By observing Ahiok, viewers understand that survival is not just a matter of strength or numbers. It is the integration. c. 1225 CE. The river mist hung low as the first light of dawn struck the village, yet this morning carried a tension that no seasonal rhythm could explain. Scouts had reported unusual movement upriver for 2 consecutive days, small boats maneuvering through concealed channels, their paddles cutting silently. From the forested riverbank, Ahiok observed the lead boat as it rounded a bend. It was small, but the coordinated movement of paddlers signaled intent. This was no casual passage, no trading mission. The village had only hours to respond. Mothers quickly gathered their children. Ahiok coordinated the first layer of observation and communication. Scouts were repositioned along hidden channels to monitor intruders without being seen. Smoke signals, drum taps, and subtle visual cues, flicking reeds, shadows across the water, conveyed critical information to the elders. Timing was crucial. Any premature signal might reveal the village. Within the village, families moved with quiet efficiency. Children were guided along hidden paths. Elders ensured that the flow of people and resources minimized exposure, and essential tools and provisions were relocated to secure areas. The line between daily routine and defensive action blurred, demonstrating how every aspect of village life had adapted. The intruders advanced caution. Every element, river currents, fallen logs, marshes, reeds, became a tool in the village. The villagers' coordination extended across generations. Elders directed movement. The first contact escalated subtly but decisively. A canoe attempting a narrow channel flanked by reeds tipped, spilling more goods and causing. As the morning progressed, the village maintained control of key river passages while safeguarding families and essential supplies. Every arrow loosed, every canoe repositioned, every path chosen reflected an intricate balance of strategy, observation, and communal coordination. The villagers' survival did not rely on force alone, but on the integration of environmental mastery and social. Ahiok's role remained central. He interpreted subtle environmental cues, a slight change in current, a ripple indicating movement, a shadow among the reeds. His instructions guided the scouts and ensured that the intruders regrouped mid-morning, testing secondary channels and attempting alternative approaches. Each maneuver was anticipated as Ahiok and other scouts had preemptively identified potential paths and choke points. Families adjusted positions, canoes shifted silently, and observation posts were reinforced. The villagers' preparedness demonstrated that survival was as much. By noon, the immediate threat had been contained. The intruders' momentum had been disrupted, and Riverine village maintained control over critical waterways. Families remained safe, supplies were secured, and scouts continued to monitor the tributaries. The fuse had been ignited, and the village's early response ensured that the ensuing conflict would unfold on terms favorable to those who understood the river, forest, and marsh. The events of this morning underscored a central truth: survival depended not merely on physical presence, but on observation, communication, and collective action. Terrain and environmental features combined with the village's coordination transformed potential vulnerability into strategic advantage. Every ripple, shadow, and movement mattered. Every decision carried consequences that would ripple through the day and beyond. As the afternoon sun, by evening, Riverine village had secured its position, protected families, and retained control of critical access points. The river and forest, once neutral elements of daily life, had been transformed into instruments of defense. The trigger event had catalyzed the village into action. It marked the beginning of a sequence that would test coordination, observation, and decision-making under pressure. For Ayok and his community, survival was earned through vigilance. 12 to 25 CE. By mid-morning, the northern bend of the river near a series of marshy islands and dense forest cover became the focal point. Shallow channels, the intruders moved with purpose, aiming to assert dominance over the trade and fishing corridors, hoping to force tribute or temporary submission from Riverine village. Their plan relied on rapid advancement and intimidation, expecting the villagers to react predictably to the approach of armed boats. Conversely, the villagers' objective was clear: preserve the community, protect families, control river access, and use the environment to offset any numerical or material advantage. The landscape itself dictated the flow of events. Sandbars slowed the larger boats, while marshy banks and fallen logs shaped their approach. Canoes from the village were positioned strategically across secondary tributaries, creating false channels that appeared navigable but concealed hazards. Scouts like Ahiok carefully monitored every movement, using subtle visual cues: a flick of reeds, a knock on a hollow log, puffs of smoke to relay information to the elders, and families moved with practiced urgency. Mothers and elders guided children along forest paths to safe zones, carrying baskets of food and essential tools. Hunters checked bows, arrows, and small shields, taking positions behind natural cover. Canoes were readied both for concealment and rapid deployment, while scouts marked observation points and signal stations along the riverbank. Each action was rehearsed, honed over years of experience, blending everyday tasks with survival strategy. The intruders advanced cautiously along the main channel, misjudging the depth of certain passages, and the terrain proved decisive. Narrow channels slowed progress, while marshes and reeds offered concealment and allowed the villagers to dictate the rhythm of engagement. Every decision, the placement of canoes, the timing of smoke, signals, the choice of observation points had immediate consequences. A single misstep could expose families or resources, while the villagers' coordination extended beyond strategy into daily life. Essential goods, food and firewood, became part of the defensive plan, their placement and movement synchronized with signals and scouting. Elders oversaw the overall flow. The turning point arrived when the intruders attempted a narrow channel flanked by marshes. Misjudging the water's depth, their canoe tipped, spilling mats and baskets into the river. Scouts immediately signaled the central fire circle and coordinated. By midday, the intruders' first major maneuver had been thwarted. Grounded boats misdirected navigation, and unexpected volleys disrupted their advance. The villagers had maintained control of the river's critical passages and ensured that families and essential supplies remained protected. Yet the day was far from over. The intruders regrouped, testing alternative channels, while Riverine village remained vigilant. The first set piece revealed an essential truth: survival depended not on sheer force, but on observation, coordination, and intimate knowledge of terrain. Scouts, elders, and families acted in unison, leveraging subtle environmental advantages. Each detail: water depth, sandbars, fallen logs, forest density, was not trivial, but a key factor in determining the flow of action. Riverine village's knowledge transmitted across generations. The engagement set the stage for escalating confrontations. Both sides learned quickly. Intruders realized the river's hidden challenges, while villagers understood the importance of continuous vigilance and adaptation. The first turning point illustrated that history is shaped as much by understanding and mastery of the environment as by numbers or weaponry. By evening, the immediate engagement concluded with minimal casualties but maximum demonstration of strategy. Riverine Village had successfully leveraged terrain timing and knowledge to gain the advantage over a numerically stronger force. The river forest and marsh elements, once considered neutral or merely sustenance, had been transformed into instruments of survival and control. The villagers' coordination, attention to detail, and decisive action exemplified the complex interplay of environment, human behavior, and communal knowledge. The river was no longer just a waterway. It was a stage where survival strategy and culture intersected. This initial set piece would resonate throughout subsequent maneuvers, shaping confidence, morale, and the village's approach to future threats. The day closed with vigilance intact. Families returned to central points, scouts reviewed signals, and elders reflected on lessons learned. While the intruders had not been fully repelled, Riverine Village had demonstrated the power of preparation, terrain mastery, and coordinated human effort. The turning point of this engagement would echo in decisions for weeks and months to come, reinforced the events of that morning when the intruders advanced along the... According to the intruder log dated in their own calendrical notation, the intruder report frames the incident through an objective lens. In stark contrast, the oral testimony from Riverine Village tells a profoundly different... The oral history portrays the village as active, adaptive, and strategically sophisticated. The divergence between these two accounts highlights a fundamental question: whose narrative is truth? The intruder log prioritizes measurable outcomes, access delay, and material disruption while minimizing the villagers' agency. The oral testimony conversely prioritizes. This clash of perspectives is further complicated by temporal distance. The intruder log was contemporaneous, capturing details shortly after events occurred, but it was filtered through a bureaucratic lens and intended for hierarchical review. The oral testimony collected decades later relies on memory repetition and transmission through generations, yet it captures subtleties of observation. Specific examples illustrate the disparity. The intruder log notes that one canoe grounded and spilled cargo, implying a minor inconvenience. The villagers' oral history, however, describes this same incident as a critical opportunity. Scouts anticipated the misstep, signaled defensive movements, and created a coordinated disruption. The differences extend to the representation of agency. In the intruder log, the villagers appear reactive. In oral testimony, they are proactive. Every action by Ahyok and other scouts is interpreted as deliberate, informed by environmental mastery and strategic foresight. The timing of signals, positioning of canoes, and redirection of families. The contrast between these two accounts invites the audience to consider the nature of historical truth. Which elements are emphasized and which are marginalized? What does it mean to see history through the eyes of those who held power versus those who lived and survived within a landscape of risk and uncertainty? The discrepancy is not accidental. This single point of divergence illuminates broader patterns across historical documentation. Official records often omit local knowledge, skill, and ingenuity. Oral testimony preserves what formal logs may ignore: the human experience, the environmental cues, and ultimately, this juxtaposition serves as a lens through which viewers can understand the interplay of perception, documentation, and lived experience. The audience is invited to ask, where does truth reside? How do differing priorities and perspectives shape the historical record? Why do some narratives diminish local agency while others highlight it? By comparing the intruder log with the villagers' oral testimony, the morning of confrontation therefore is understood differently depending on the perspective. For outsiders, the day is an exercise in logistical enforcement, a routine assertion of territorial and economic control. For the villagers, it is a testament to adaptive intelligence, environmental mastery, and cultural continuity. Both accounts document the same river, the same canoes, the same rising sun. This singular collision of accounts anchors the narrative of Riverine Village. It shows that the village's survival depended as much on perception, foresight, and interpretation of landscape cues as on tangible resistance. It also reinforces the role of individuals like Ahyok, whose decisions, observation, and guidance created opportunities that are barely visible in formal records but vividly preserved in oral memory. By highlighting this point of conflict between sources, the documentary encourages reflection. Historical truth is not singular. It is contingent, layered, and shaped by those who record it and those who live it. Viewers are left with a central question: which narrative resonates with the lived reality of the village? And what can we learn about the intersection of power, observation, and survival when accounts? The morning's events viewed through these two lenses underscore the fragility and adaptability of Riverine Village. Scouts' observations, signal coordination, and family guidance allowed the community to act decisively, despite pressure from a larger armed force. Yet the divergence of accounts reminds us that, written by juxtaposing the intruder log with oral testimony, the audience is offered a rare insight into the mechanisms of adaptation and resilience. It becomes evident that the villagers' capacity to navigate the river, interpret signals, and protect families was as crucial to the outcome as any numerical advantage or weaponry. This is the central lesson of the morning. Survival is not. The days following the initial confrontation along the northern bend of the river carried a tension that stretched across every household in Riverine village. The intruders, though slowed and momentarily disrupted, had regrouped, signaling that the episode of the previous morning was only the beginning. The river marshes and forest became a dynamic stage, each current sandbar and fallen tree a potential ally. At dawn, Ayok and other scouts moved through the mist, scanning the tributaries for signs of the enemy. Every ripple, every displaced reed, every unusual bird flight was a message. Families loaded canoes with essentials, including food tools and woven mats, while elders instructed younger villagers on which paths were safe for movement. The air was thick with smoke from small signal fires. The intruders advanced along multiple channels, simultaneously attempting to envelop the village. From elevated riverbanks, scouts observed patterns in the currents and predicted the intruders' timing. Ahiok relayed instructions. Despite the strategic orchestration, the villagers' experience was grounded in the human tactile details of daily life. Mothers balanced baskets of grain and dried fish on their backs while guiding children over uneven terrain. Elders checked smoke signals and adjusted positions of temporary lookouts. Young scouts sprinted along forest edges, shifting light canoe loads to block channels. Every gesture, every movement was part of an intricate dance between survival and environmental mastery. Weather added an unpredictable variable. A sudden gust of wind shifted smoke from signal fires, obscuring cues. Rains softened the marshy ground, making certain paths treacherous for both children and loaded canoes. Ahiok and his team had to quickly recalibrate which routes were safe, which signals still readable, which positions needed reinforcement. The environment was not passive. It acted as both challenge and partner in the unfolding conflict. Around mid-morning, the intruders attempted a frontal advance along the main channel. Their canoes loaded with goods and men entered a bend flanked by marsh and dense reeds. Scouts had anticipated this, using small disturbances in reeds and subtle water ripples to mislead the intruders about depth and direction. A canoe grounded on a shallow sandbar and bundles of mats and food spilled into the river. Immediately, Ahiok signaled for a coordinated action, a volley of arrows, and the activation of alternative channels to delay and confuse the intruders. Simultaneously, families moved further inland, guided by elders and supported by young scouts. Canoes carrying provisions were hidden behind natural cover, while children moved in small protected groups along pre-planned paths. The coordination reflected both tactical acumen and deep communal trust. Each individual's action mattered. Each movement was part of a larger order. The intruders, frustrated by misjudged channels and disrupted momentum, attempted to regroup. Ahiok anticipated their adjustment, signaling the placement of additional canoes and activating new observation points. As the morning progressed, the village maintained control of strategic river passages, while the intruders were forced to adapt repeatedly to environmental and human obstacles they had not expected. Voices, signals, and subtle gestures created a continuous thread of communication. Elders used hand signs and knocks on logs to coordinate movements. Mothers whispered instructions to children while carrying supplies. Hunters and older youths. By midday, the intruders' initial momentum had collapsed. Canoes grounded repeatedly, their cargo displaced, and misjudged channels slowed further advancement. Villagers had used terrain timing and coordinated action to establish control, preserving families, protecting provisions, and maintaining Through this process, Riverine Village demonstrated a capacity for rapid collective problem-solving. Knowledge accumulated over generations, whether of river currents, marshy obstacles, or forest paths, became actionable intelligence. Scouts like Ahiok were not merely observers. They were active interpreters translating environment. As afternoon descended, the intruders attempted a flanking maneuver, moving along secondary tributaries to bypass the village's main defenses. Scouts anticipated this, deploying canoes and redirecting movement to create natural bottlenecks and deceptive passages. The intruders struggled with navigation, while villagers maintained clear communication through smoke, sound, and observation. Every environmental cue was exploited, every movement monitored. This series of maneuvers marked a clear turning point. The village had not only defended itself, but had forced the intruders into predictable paths, limiting their options and conserving village resources. Families remained protected, supply lines secured, and critical river channels controlled. The engagement emphasized that survival and strategic advantage were inseparable from environmental mastery, coordination, and vigilance. By evening, the village assessed the day's actions. Minor missteps were noted and corrected for future scenarios. Scouts documented environmental observations, elders reviewed the effectiveness of signals and pathways, and families regrouped in secure areas. Though the intruders remained present, the first large-scale engagement had set the tone. Riverine village could leverage knowledge, observation, and coordinate. The events of this day illuminated the human dimension of survival. Each individual, from Ahiok interpreting subtle ripples to mothers guiding children and elders orchestrating communication, played an irreplaceable role. Physical terrain and environmental conditions were transformed into strategic tools through human agency, illustrating that knowledge, observation, and collective. By nightfall, Riverine village had successfully navigated the first wave of confrontation. The river marshes, the morning air hung heavy with mist, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke from signal. Ahiok, the young scout whose keen observation had guided the village through prior engagements. Families moved in calculated patterns along hidden forest paths, guided by elders who had memorized every subtle turn and landmark. Children carried The intruders advanced through a narrow bend, unaware that the river itself had been mapped and memorized by villagers. Their lead boat struck a submerged log, tipping cargo into the water. Scouts signaled instantly, directing villagers to adjust positions, redistribute families, and execute planned distractions. Smoke and drum signals moved. By mid-morning, the first real clash occurred. A small skirmish erupted along the riverbank when the intruders attempted to force passage through a marshy channel. Arrows and splashes were enough to halt progress temporarily. Ahiok led a small team to reinforce key positions, using knowledge of shallow currents and hidden channels to trap the intruders in confusing waterways. Families in the vicinity. The critical turning point came when an intruder vessel misjudged depth near a confluence of tributaries. Canoes from the village intercepted, forcing the intruder to ground, and bundles of supplies spilled into the river. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the river transformed into a theater of tension. Intruders attempted alternate routes, but each was anticipated by Ahiok and his fellow scouts. Families continued to move along forest paths. By late afternoon, the intruders regrouped for a final push, seeking to circumvent the village's defenses. But the network of observation and strategic placement was too robust. Signals guided the repositioning of canoes, the temporary concealment of families, and the targeted harassment of intruder vessels. The culmination of actions, environmental manipulation, coordinated human movement, and timely signaling created a turning point that decisively favored the villagers. This escalation revealed the human dimension of strategic mastery. Elder scouts, hunters, and even children acted in synchrony. Smoke signals, drum taps, and subtle visual cues were integrated into a living network of communication. Canoes were shifted precisely to exploit currents and sandbars. Families moved as units, blending the practical necessities of daily life with survival strategy. The villagers' actions transformed terrain and natural conditions into instruments of control, demonstrating that the combination of knowledge, foresight, and coordination could outweigh numbers or material advantage. The point of no return emerged as the intruders' attempts to advance were repeatedly thwarted. Canoes grounded, cargo lost, and movement slowed, all under the influence of village strategy and environmental manipulation. Ahiok coordinated scouts to monitor secondary channels, predict intruder reactions, and guide families along concealed paths. The river and forest became both stage and actor in the unfolding drama, with human and environmental elements in constant dialogue. As evening approached, the intruders' momentum collapsed entirely. The village had retained control of critical river passages, secured families and resources, and maintained the integrity of observation posts. Minor skirmishes continued, but they no longer threatened the community's survival. The morning sequence from initial approach to final consolidation marked an irreversible shift. Riverine village had asserted mastery over its environment and defended its autonomy decisively. The consequences extended beyond the immediate. The intruders would return with caution, now aware that the village possessed not only knowledge of terrain, but a capacity for coordinated action. Families had learned the rhythm of survival under pressure, and elders reinforced the importance of observation, rapid communication, and adaptive strategy. The day's events would echo in collective memory, shaping oral histories, seasonal planning, and communal practices for decades. By nightfall, the river was calm again, but the stakes had permanently changed. Riverine Village had navigated a turning point where hesitation could have meant disaster and decisive action ensured continuity. The point of no return had been reached. The landscape, human ingenuity, and cultural knowledge had intersected to protect the village and secure its legacy. Observers, whether intruders recording a log or future chroniclers documenting oral histories, would note the significance of the day, but the lived experience of villagers, the coordination, anticipation, and subtle mastery of environment formed the true narrative of survival. In these hours, Riverine Village demonstrated that history is made not merely through confrontation, but through the disciplined, precise, and interconnected actions of those who inhabit and understand their world intimately. As night fell, families gathered around fires, scouts reviewed positions, and elders reflected on lessons learned. The intruders were still present in the wider river system, yet the village had established control and retained autonomy. The events of this day would shape strategic thinking, resource management, and communal memory for generations, ensuring that the knowledge, foresight, and coordination displayed during the confrontation were woven into the cultural fabric of Riverine Village. The morning had set in motion consequences that could not be reversed. The river, forest, and marsh had borne witness to the point of no return, where decisions, observation, and mastery of environment converged to define survival, autonomy, and the enduring legacy of the community. The villagers, guided by scouts like Ahyok and elders with long memories, had transformed a precarious situation into a decisive demonstration of adaptation strategy and human resilience. In the months following the decisive confrontation along the northern bend of the river, Riverine Village entered a period of recalibration. The immediate aftermath was visible in the rearrangement of daily life. Families repaired or relocated dwellings damaged during the skirmishes. Temporary camps were set up on higher ground, and food stores were reorganized to ensure equitable access while anticipating future disruptions. Canoes and equipment were checked and repaired, signaling a heightened awareness that the river could no longer be treated solely as a route for sustenance, but also as a strategic asset whose control had to be maintained. Within the first year, the village adapted to the new realities imposed by both the physical and political landscape. The intruders, having recognized the villagers' intimate mastery of river channels and marshes, refrained from direct confrontation in the immediate term, instead establishing outposts along secondary tributaries. These outposts imposed subtle pressures. Trade became conditional. Travel along certain channels required negotiation, and movement within previously secure areas had to be monitored constantly. Villagers responded by adjusting travel schedules, shifting families to safer quarters, and expanding scouting networks to maintain early warning capability. This was not merely logistical, but psychological. The community learned that vigilance was an ongoing condition of survival, and that any lapse could have material consequences. By the fifth year, Riverine Village faced more formalized external pressures. Neighboring confederations, now aware of the village's strategic significance along the river, imposed agreements resembling proto-treaties. Tributary control, access to fishing grounds, and use of forest paths were codified through verbal accords negotiated by village elders and external representatives. These agreements altered traditional patterns of movement and resource access, forcing the village to reorganize economic and social routines. Canoe travel, hunting zones, and food storage were all adapted to accommodate these new terms, embedding constraints and protections within the rhythm of daily life. One particularly lasting consequence was the partial relocation of sections of the village to higher terraces along the river. Floodplain dwellings, once central to seasonal harvests and fishing, were now considered too vulnerable to both environmental and human pressures. Families moved incrementally over several seasons, preserving continuity while responding to shifting risk. Paths were rerouted, communal gathering areas reorganized, and observation posts extended to maintain surveillance of the river channels. These physical adjustments created a new spatial configuration, a new map in which the village's footprint was smaller in some areas but more strategically positioned, reflecting both environmental prudence and lessons learned from confrontation. Longer term, over the span of 20 years, the consequences became cultural and structural. Oral traditions codified the memory of the events, integrating them into ritual observances and community stories. Children were taught not only survival skills, but also the significance of environmental knowledge, cooperation, and vigilance. The river itself became central in teaching spatial intelligence and historical awareness, where currents shifted, where channels could conceal intruders, and where natural obstacles could be leveraged for protection. The community's understanding of its own territory was both inherited and actively maintained, creating a living knowledge map that influenced decision-making for generations. Political power structures also evolved. Elders who had demonstrated foresight during the crisis assumed expanded authority in inter-village councils, shaping decisions on alliances, trade, and territorial negotiation. The previous social equilibrium had been disrupted. Positions of influence became tied explicitly to capacity for observation, coordination, and strategic planning. Young scouts trained under Ahiok and other experienced observers inherited responsibilities that extended beyond immediate survival, encompassing diplomacy, resource management, and inter-village communication. Material and infrastructural consequences were tangible. Certain fishing and agricultural areas were abandoned or reallocated in response to both environmental risk and the need for defensive positioning. Canoe building and storage practices were refined, emphasizing rapid deployment and concealment. Families constructed secondary storage and sleeping spaces to ensure redundancy. Over time, these adaptations transformed the village's material culture, integrating lessons of resilience, risk management, and environmental mastery into the very structures of daily life. The new map was both literal and metaphorical. Channels, paths, and dwellings were physically rearranged to reflect strategic priorities. Social hierarchies shifted to reward experience, foresight, and decision-making. Rituals and oral narratives embedded the memory of the confrontation and its consequences into communal consciousness. The village had survived, but in doing so, it had been reshaped, its geography, its organization, and its collective memory permanently altered. By reflecting on these consequences, one sees the interplay of environment, human agency, and social adaptation. The immediate skirmish had set off a ripple that extended for decades. Families relocated, river channels were reinterpreted, and social structures evolved to prioritize surveillance, coordination, and environmental knowledge. Decisions taken during the confrontation informed the village's approach to trade defense and negotiation, embedding resilience into both physical and social landscapes. The documentation of these changes through oral testimony and later record-keeping reinforces their significance. Elders recounted the adjustment of canoe routes, the movement of families to higher terraces, and the negotiation of resource access with neighboring settlements. Future generations were taught the importance of vigilance, of reading terrain, and of coordinating action across families and kinship groups. In this way, the immediate tactical decisions of one critical day informed long-term survival strategies and cultural continuity. In essence, the aftermath of the confrontation along the northern bend redefined Riverine village. The map of the land was no longer only geographic but infused with memory, strategy, and social learning. Families adapted their routines, elders structured oversight, and young scouts inherited the tools and knowledge necessary to navigate both river and social currents. The village's legacy became encoded not just in physical rearrangement, but in the cognitive map of its inhabitants, a blueprint for survival, shaped by observation, foresight, and collective decision-making. This chapter of Riverine village history, the new map, illustrates how short-term crises can generate enduring change. Environmental mastery, social coordination, and strategic adaptation intersected to preserve lives and resources, while embedding lessons in both material culture and oral tradition. The events set precedents for generations: how rivers are read, how families are organized, how knowledge is transmitted, and how collective decision-making can ensure continuity in the face of external pressures. The immediate consequences: rearranged dwellings, secured supplies, and controlled river passages were clear. The mid-term consequences: agreements with neighboring confederations, relocation of families, and institutionalization of vigilance were equally significant. Long-term, the cultural memory of the confrontation and its aftermath became a cornerstone of community identity, teaching future generations how to integrate environmental observation with social coordination for survival. In the new order, Riverine village was both physically and socially transformed. The confrontation had closed one chapter, but it opened another, a life informed by past experience, strategic foresight, and the continuous interplay between terrain, human agency, and collective memory. The new map was complete, a testament to adaptation, resilience, and the enduring legacy of a community shaped by the river, the forest, and the choices of those who inhabited them. Generations later, the Riverine village is remembered not only through the remnants of dwellings and pathways, but through the enduring memories of those who remained. The river still winds as it did centuries ago, its bends and tributaries whispering stories of resilience and adaptation. Elders recount how their ancestors navigated both the waters and the perils of human conflict, preserving life knowledge and culture despite external pressures. Community rituals retain fragments of these histories. Seasonal ceremonies along the river commemorate the harvests and migrations that once sustained the village, blending practical knowledge with cultural expression. Songs passed down orally describe the movements of scouts and families, the coordination of signals, and the intimate relationship with the river and forest. Children learn these melodies as lessons in observation and cooperation, encoding strategies for survival in rhythm and repetition. Certain physical sites continue to anchor collective memory. The elevated terraces where families relocated to avoid floods and intrusions remain in use, their position and design echoing centuries-old decisions about safety and efficiency. Small markers near the river's bend indicate observation points once maintained by scouts like Ahiyok, now part of local lore. Even abandoned paths and hidden forest trails are remembered as routes of protection and escape, teaching descendants how knowledge of terrain has always been central to communal survival. Artifacts and durable tools carry echoes of this history. Woven baskets, canoe fragments, and fire-starting implements preserved in soil or memory connect current villagers with the practical ingenuity of ancestors. These objects are not celebrated solely for craftsmanship, but as evidence of adaptive strategies, environmental mastery, and coordinated action. They anchor stories in tangible reality, bridging past and present. Through these enduring traces, the villager's memory illustrates the interplay between human agency and environment. The river is not merely a backdrop, but a participant in the village's history, shaping decisions, pathways, and social structures. Elders emphasize that understanding terrain, monitoring currents, and interpreting natural cues were as critical as human collaboration, reminding listeners that knowledge and observation were central to survival. The oral narratives also preserve lessons in social coordination and foresight. Tales recount how families moved along concealed paths, how scouts communicated through smoke and subtle signals, and how every individual contributed to collective security. These stories transmit more than fact. They convey principles of planning, attention, and adaptability that remain relevant across generations. In learning them, contemporary villagers absorb strategies for decision-making, risk assessment, and environmental awareness embedded in culture. The naming of places' endonyms reflects the lasting imprint of these experiences. The terraces, bends, and forest paths carry names derived from events, individuals, and roles integral to survival. These names encode both memory and guidance, teaching future generations about past conflicts, environmental knowledge, and social organization. Place names thus function as mnemonic devices, linking geography, history, and culture in a continuous living record. Academically, these surviving traces provide insight into the adaptive strategies of pre-contact and early contact native communities. Scholars examining the village's layout, oral histories, and environmental use can reconstruct both material and cognitive maps, understanding how knowledge of rivers, marshes, and forests was integrated into social, economic, and defensive practices. The interplay between observation coordination and environmental adaptation becomes evident, revealing a community whose strategies were encoded in ritual song and spatial organization. Ultimately, Riverine Village's legacy demonstrates that history is preserved not only in written records, but in lived experience, memory, and cultural practice. The people who stayed maintained continuity through observation, cooperation, and environmental mastery, transmitting lessons through song, ritual, and place. Their stories remind us that the landscape is inseparable from human action, that survival relies on both knowledge and collective engagement, and that memory embodied in objects, paths, and melodies sustains the bridge between past and present. In contemplating the village today, the question persists: how do people remember their past? Through tangible artifacts, named places, ritual observances, and oral histories, the community demonstrates that knowledge, adaptation, and cultural continuity are inseparable. By tracing these echoes, we learn not only about survival along the river, but about the intricate interplay of land, people, and memory that defines human experience across generations. The river still flows, and the forest still whispers. But the legacy of Riverine Village in its terraces, its tools, its songs, and its stories endures as a testament to observation, coordination, and resilience. Those who stayed did more than survive. They encoded strategies, history, and identity into both landscape and memory, ensuring that future generations could navigate not only the river, but the challenges of life itself. History left its mark, but the echoes of Riverine Village remain in memory songs and place names. Which part of their legacy would you preserve? Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you tell this story today?